Hello, Louise.
Hello, Sarah.
So here we are for chapter 6 of Journey of the Adopted Self by BJ Lifton, Betty Jean Lifton. Chapter 6 is called Artificial Self, Forbidden Self. And it's kind of all about the split personality of an adoptee and like with that early psychic trauma and how one handles it.
Yeah. At the beginning, I was like, I don't know if I relate to this much. And then I have like four circle things that say me, me, me.
Yes, yes.
So I guess I do relate. Once again, it's like reading this uncovers so many aha moments for me
Mm-hmm.
where I almost have to stop and go and have memories I've forgotten about, just things that you stuff down.
Yeah.
I don't know if that happens to you, but it's well, just right at the beginning she starts off with a drawing, Edward Gorey, a drawing that elicits
Mm-hmm.
both wonder and dread. And it says, in which a boy stands on top of a ravine looking out into the distance while his teddy bear, having slipped from his grasp, falls into the abyss below. The adopted child, having perceived the terrible truth that children can be lost from their parents, is both the boy and the teddy bear
Mm-hmm.
in the drawing. I'm going to look that drawing up. But right away, this brought up two things for me. One is I have a weird fear of heights, but besides that, it's I always, since I was young, dreamed that I was falling, and I still have these
Oh,
dreams,
yeah.
and that I'm also being stolen. Two things I've dreamed always and are two of my biggest fears. Like I'll literally be somewhere and be scared someone will whisk me off into a van, which is a lot of young people, of course, when you're young. But I mean, I've had them since I can remember. And she actually tackled that in this. And I don't know, how did this beginning hit you when you started reading?
Yeah, I haven't had I've had falling dreams, and I think lots of people have had those. So I don't necessarily equate that to my adoption, uh, but what got to me was just it's enough. There's already the wounds, but yet then there's a third, right? So the
Mhm.
birth and then being adopted. The third trauma is the secrecy that disconnects the adoptee from their history and their parentage. And that I really,
Yeah, I have it right there.
yeah.
Trauma, secrecy.
Yes. And there was a lot in the chapter that um
Well, she gets into the two selves, right? So
yes, the
when she
divided and the artificial.
yeah, so when she starts with the divided self, I thought, you know, was I like that? I started to review. Was I this child who like thought one thing and then you suppress another? And I think I really did actually,
Mhm.
because she even mentions, I had a really good relationship with my adopted parents, obviously. And so you get that guilt thing, like, should I evaluate this? Like, I love them. So she says, even in the best of situations, you have it, it's in there.
Mhm.
And then I kind of feel like I have permission to look at that. And the part where she says that you push something down, like you're this bad kid or a good kid. I used to feel really bad inside and guilty
Oh,
all the
me
time.
too. Like and then the self-loathing that came from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. If I disappointed my parents, or I saw it on their face, I just had this fear that I've like done something, you know, that I don't think is normal to have, this self-loathing guilt, like, oh my gosh, I'm just the world's biggest disappointment. So I'd work harder to not be. And they're probably just being normal reaction to me, like I'm disappointed. But to me, it was a huge thing. And I felt a lot of that divided self, like how she wrote about it psychologically, really kind of got in the
and
core.
but maybe I think there is some truth in, you know, maybe not in the case of your parents or every adopted parent, but I definitely think, they're grappling with their own disappointment
Yeah.
of infertility and that this isn't their biological child, and particularly adopted parents who didn't have biological children, yours did, but so there might be some truth to that without them
Sure.
knowing, like a
It's subliminal, right? It's like deep in your
subconscious kind
psyche.
of
Yeah.
feeling of you're not really mine, and that translates, however it translates to the adoptees. So then we're like, the clown, not the clown, but what's the
Jester.
the jester trying to save your life,
Yeah.
and perform in a way. And it even says like that there's a double message of being and not being. The parents are saying you are not what you were born to be, but what we want you to be.
Yeah.
Only if adopted children commit themselves fully to the identity of the adoptive clan can they have the adoptive parents' love.
And you do that, because I remember actually trying to be who I was supposed to be in the family, because my family was a strong family with certain pride about certain things. And I'd try so hard to be that and not really, you're a pretend person in that way, because I'd be that, but inside thinking, do they realize I'm not like that? It's now I can say it with words, but back then I didn't know what the problem was, but I felt, isolated from that. And it's very interesting, because psychologically, this just is what it is. The baby leaving the birth
Well, it even
mother.
says, they are too young to articulate what is going on inside of them, but adult adoptees looking back in sorrow as much as in anger, understand what they did to survive.
Yeah.
And here again, we talk about this often, but the child forced to give up the real self cannot develop feelings of belonging. There's instead a feeling of basic anxiety of being isolated and helpless, which is totally how I've felt my whole life. And again, I've said this every podcast, but mine is conflated too with my adoptive mom having when they split and then stayed with my dad, and like there was just total loneliness and confusion and isolation. And
it makes me sad that we didn't find this till later in life.
I know.
To ponder on, just I even find it now, honestly, how she says you have a hard time connecting and being real in a situation. I have a really hard time, or anger. This was a thing she brought up, that if there's anger going on, so my family could be, they could argue. And my mom used to say they loved hard and could fight hard, and they couldn't, but that scared me. Both versions scared me. Being loved too much, I didn't understand like that. I was the push away, and then arguing scared me. So if there's ever any kind of disagreements or whatever, I just want to run away. And I have that now with friends, with relationships. And I work really hard to like stay in there in the uncomfortable when I'm so uncomfortable. And you and I both have that, I know. So it's like, but I think this all stems from trying to just mask over anything that's going to make you vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And she got into the artificial self too, how you create a new person, really, and the artificial self talks to the real self, like you talk to each other. Like, did you ever have that, like two different people?
I think so. She also talks a lot about fantasies, as you get like the ghost kingdom and fantasies. I've talked about how I would put in my transistor radio and they weren't called AirPods, but whatever they were.
I forget what they're called.
I know. And just zone out and fantasize that I was anywhere but where I was, and wondering who I was and what wonderful world lay ahead of me. Or in the car, I'd lean my head against the window and stare out and just constantly in a fantasy world.
Yeah. And
I think my teachers would say stuff too, like, "See, your head is in the clouds." And
your head's in the clouds.
I recently did my Enneagram. I don't know. You haven't done it yet.
No,
but,
I'm going to.
My Enneagram, and Enneagram says that you are what you are before that's who you are at birth. But my Enneagram reads so much like an adoptee, like,
oh, it does. I'm crazy to do mine. We should do a whole, Facebook Live on that.
On Enneagrams. Yeah. So
because that'd be interesting. One thing you said that you just reminded me of, because this is a long chapter. She said that sometimes the adoptee will take on, this is something I did, is take on role models, like a lot of role models in your life as adults that you are trying to almost find
yes
fit for. And I did that with I was on teams I was on student council and teachers. I actually was like, oh my gosh, that's like my childhood, was finding these role models I would glam onto and really try to learn from and pattern off of. And it's funny you said that with teachers, because I kind of was that trying to appease kid, and yet I got in a lot of trouble and was
Mm.
also not a good kid. So
Me,
it's
I
like,
got in a lot of trouble. There was a whole example of an adoptee boy who was adopted into a Jewish family, and he was told he was adopted and that his birth mother wasn't Jewish, and they converted him to Judaism. And then when it was time for his bar mitzvah, he was like, I don't want to do it. And they made him do it, and he happily went along with it, and then started acting out like all over the
terribly.
place. And finally, his mom, then he would ask about his birth mother. Oh, we don't know anything, blah blah blah. But then when they finally, his adoptive mother took it upon herself to sort of, I guess he went to therapy. He was in lots of therapy and took it upon herself to finally like investigate all
Yes.
this. And and that made me think, I think I wrote it down, that it was sad, but it was also kind of selfish. Like, you should have done all this before, maybe it was the time. But again, I go back to that it just was, that adoption was about their needs, the parents' need,
Yeah.
not about that baby. Because if that kid was saying, I need to know more information,
Yes.
this is how I'm feeling, and you're just like, you can't have that information
They kept putting him
because she
off.
said she
Yeah.
was scared that she would lose him. Well, it's just,
It's kind of like a relationship, but if you're not honest, you might lose them, but you have to be honest.
yeah.
And that reminded me too. I've talked about this before. My dad, my adopted dad, one area that he kind of got that I didn't fit sometimes, which I really appreciate. I wish he was alive so I could say, I really appreciate that about you, because my family back east was very, they did the debutante ball, the whole thing, and everybody came out and had what is that called? Cotillion, the whole,
Mhm.
and two of my relatives were very much pushing my dad for me to have that. I spent my summers back east, and they were like, oh, she's not a proper woman until she has this, a whole thing. And I remember just being like adamantly like, first of all, I have social anxiety in those kinds of situations, and I didn't know what that was back then, but I was like, oh no. And I remember telling my dad, I don't want this. And he was like, that's not you. That's just not you. And you don't have to have that. And he said, do you think that's you? And I'm like, nope. And he's like, I don't either. And they were on him. I remember him on the phone, and I was sitting in the living room saying, it's just not going to happen. Like, kind of. And my mom wasn't that pleased. She would have loved for me to have done that, by the way. She loved that stuff. And I wasn't that girly girl. And he knew though that there was something he was sensing, that I just, maybe because he had a hard childhood, that
Yeah.
I was doing this to fit them. It almost makes me cry. But it's funny because I thought about that boy and I was reading it, and like, that really changed his life. It pushed him into a whole
Yeah. And
other.
he was in how many different, they put him in like a psychiatric ward or something.
Yes.
You know,
Crazyville. Just
yeah, just
just just because he was who he was, saying this isn't me. That's literally what he was saying.
uh,
I know. And then the Ghost Kingdom was interesting. I didn't fantasize as much as you did, but I did a lot of daydream. Yeah, maybe I did. I was kind of the one, she said in there, that squashed down like the birth mother was, how people fantasized who the birth mother was or where they're from. I more was like, didn't want to bring it up in my own head even. I didn't want to think about it. I think about her. I did the squashing, which doesn't really work either. It comes out later, right?
yeah,
Whatever we squash down bubbles to the surface.
it does for sure.
If you're listening to this, deal with what's squashing down.
I thought this was interesting. The luck of the draw.
Yeah.
By the age of 7, right? Which that pivotal point when my parents got divorced, I was 7. By the age of 7, most adopted children are still open and trusting with their parents as they begin to probe for more concrete information about their birth mother and the circumstances of the birth. Without the luck of the draw, adopted children will find themselves with parents who use them to serve their own emotional needs. that's all that needs to be said. Just
But
really,
the luck of the draw, I just like how it's just
Mhm.
a basic chapter about that.
Yeah.
You know, that whole
Yeah.
thing with sevens, my husband's fascinated by it. Like every 7 years psychologically, there's in development, it's like 7, 14, and 21 are huge shifts. And I just
Mhm.
thought about that happened to you at 7,
Yeah.
because that's actually a huge pivotal time as a 7-year-old in children's,
I guess that couldn't have been a worse time for that to have happened,
yeah,
really.
maybe. Yeah. That's funny that you said that, because I thought about it when I read that and then I didn't realize you were 7.
Yeah, I
Maybe
was
I did. I
7.
just forgot. And yeah, that's big.
Um, and
Well,
yeah, okay, we already covered the fantasy stuff.
fantasy and family romance. Well, I think the last part of it is kind of like the positive reality and the negative reality of oneself, right?
Mhm.
So, I don't know. What do you want to say about that? I have to cut that section. Forgot what I
What
was
did
going to say.
I mean, I think it's stuff we've already covered, right? Adoptees hold on to positive fantasies of their birth parents as an escape from the mysterious reality in which they find themselves and as a way of holding on to self-esteem.
Yeah. Well, on adoptee Twitter, that's so much of what I see on adoptee Twitter and different things I'm learning and reading from other adoptees is self-esteem is the big thing for so many people, right? And there can be,
Yes.
and it's funny because someone just asked me, not an adoptee the other day, a friend, well, you're so confident in Sarah's like that too. I know you both. And do you think it's attacking your, I mean, I don't see you as not self, worth or all these things. And I said, well, it's not really that, because there's a lot of very successful adopted people out there. They're not, it's not all doom and gloom, but that doesn't mean inside they think that.
Right. Of course not.
So I think that's that. I think we also
And
get very good at,
that's our ability to be chameleons and do what we need to do to keep an image so
yeah,
that, we're loved and kept and all of that stuff.
it's some of the toughest people out there. And I was thinking of all the famous people that people know that are adopted. I won't name them in case they don't want to be named, but it's some of them are the toughest people out there and most successful, but inside they're all relating from what we can see. So that's
Yes.
it was an interesting observation, because I'm so glad that friends do have these conversations though and want to talk about it. And it's
I
important.
like to, I like that people think I'm confident. If they only knew what I really felt inside.
Of course.
Well, here's another thing that like we're getting towards the end of the chapter,
Yep.
but the adoptee may also show self-denigration and self-blame as a rejected child of the
Mm.
natural parents and as an artificial child of the pretend parents.
Mhm. You're rejected on both sides.
Yes.
And if you try to please, there was also the cross between, if you try to please one, are you dismissing the other?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
so,
it's pressure and guilt. And
yeah,
one thing adoptee Twitter does say a lot, which is true, is there's so much out there about adoption, but not from our point of view. And they don't want to hear our points of view,
yeah. Well,
um,
we're wrapping up in a timely manner the Academy Awards, and I saw that movie Juno again.
oh,
And I love that movie when it came out. Well, also just because it was well written, but it struck me different this time.
me too.
And I was thinking, wow, that's such a change in the short amount of time for even my
Uh-huh.
thinking, how I think of that movie. Not that, I'm not going to judge the movie, and lots of Juno fans out there. I'm not dogging your movie because I used to love it, but now I see it as a different message.
Now I'm repulsed by it now. I'll be
There you
straight
go.
up like, and I think, the writer of that movie clearly didn't really know anybody who was adopted. She just
No,
wrote the story because she had an idea, but it wasn't. Here comes Duchess. I see her
we have
behind you.
we have both our dogs today
Both of our
making an
dogs.
appearance. You have to go to our YouTube channel. This is such
Yes, if
excitement.
you're only listening to this, go to YouTube. You'll see both of them. I think Duchess is getting ready to bark.
bark.
I had one last thing I wanted
Yep.
to that I highlighted. Natural children who have parents, siblings, and other blood related relatives are grounded in a reality from which they can spin their images. but adoptees do not feel grounded or connected by any such reality. Much of their imagery is not centered on the adoptive family in which they live as if they belong, but rather in fantasy and imagination. And that's what I kind of want people, if anyone's listening who's not an adoptee, because I will have these conversations with people and they say, well, I feel those abandonment issues too. And I feel this and that. But there it is. That wraps up
Yeah.
the major difference between kept people and not kept people.
Yeah, it really does. And people do feel those feelings too. It's just a deeper core from the beginning of life situation. And that is just what our thing is about.
Yes.
Because everybody's going to have feelings going along, but I think that does sum it up. I like that.
Yes. Well, we have a really, really,
Really
great guest today. It's just, yeah, you'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
We'll talk to her soon.
Yes. Bye.